Hey there, Internet friends. Trevor Starkey here with another episode of my 2017 Game of the Year coverage. Today we're going to tackle my best non-2017 games of 2017. Now this list was formerly known as the top 10 non-20 blah 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 games that I didn't get around to playing until blah blah blah, and that was just way too long and convoluted, so I have simplified the name this year. So this is going to be ports or remasters or just games that I generally have not gotten around to playing until this year. Kicking off the list, we have number 10, Darkest Dungeon, which I remember first hearing about, I think, when it was in early access on Steam, and I remember the idea of turn-based RPG combat where the characters actually suffered from, like, mental health from all the admittedly tragic shit that they have to deal with, struck me as a very novel idea. And I didn't get around to playing it until earlier this year. I picked it up on Vita, or more likely probably my PlayStation 4, and I just got it on Vita as a cross-buy, and ended up taking it with me to PAX South this year in a pre-Switch world. And I enjoyed it. I didn't put too much time into it because it falls into that category of way too difficult for my patience level. But I enjoyed the art style. I enjoyed the combat permadeath factor because it does give stakes to this. But I, probably barely escaped with the skin of my teeth at one point, and, a couple of my characters ended up basically being so broken by the experience that they were useless. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed what I played. It's not, again, something I'll probably go back to just because I would be way too stressed out by the difficulty level of the game. But it was good enough to earn a top 10 spot on this list. Number 9, a game called Knee Deep. This is another one that first caught my eye, in years past. I believe at PAX South last year. Specifically, it caught my eye with the subtitle Swamp Noir in 3 Acts. And I think at the time, maybe Act 1, maybe Act 2 was out, and they were both on Steam. And so I followed its development at least closely enough to know that it was coming to PlayStation this year, and I picked it up earlier this year. But because it was previously released on Steam, I'm not counting it as a 2017 game. From a gameplay perspective, it's basically a more animated graphic novel. You're not even really moving the characters around. They are going on a preset path. You're just kind of picking the dialogue options, and there's like a couple little mini games scattered throughout the game here and there. The thing that really intrigued me is that the characters are basically framed as a stage play. It's as if these are actors who are on a stage that you see as the player, and you're basically like the audience for this enormous mammoth stage that is, multiple football fields long. And then the characters hop onto a platform, the platform comes downstage to the audience, and then the stage behind them moves, rotates, and reveals the next location, and then the characters kind of get transported back onto the stage, and the lights come up and the next scene begins. And so that's really what caught my attention, and what I really liked about this game was the idea that it's presenting a play in this weird digital fashion. It got me thinking about that'd be a really cool way, if you need to set this play within the game, has rooftop chases and stuff in it, which you could never do in a traditional real-life play, but here you could do it in a video game sense, and you can, make the sets as big as you want, but still present it as a stage play, so to speak. And so it really intrigued me, and I really liked that premise, and I really enjoyed the murder mystery story that kind of unfolds throughout the game. The reason it's not higher on my list is because I think it suffers from that same kind of thing that a lot of, especially choose-your-own-adventure type narrative games suffer from, in that the characters never feel like they're talking to each other or responding to one another. They feel mostly like they are just reading their lines off of a script. So that's always one of my pet peeves. And this, in a game that is so deliberately set to kind of evoke a theater and live action reaction kind of performance, the fact that you have that element as kind of butting against it, just did not work for me. Number 8, Broken Age. After trying to get into it last year and failing, I finally just kind of sat down and forced it this year. Adventure games typically aren't my thing, but I enjoyed the art style and the writing and the performances, so I wanted to sit down and really see where Shay and Vella's story went and how they might connect. And I was very satisfied with the twists and the turns of the story itself and seeing how things come together, but it suffered from the issue I think a lot of especially this type of adventure game suffers from, where the solution to a puzzle is just overly obscure and you basically aren't going to get it until you've tried every item with everything on the screen to finally get the one that clicks, and then you're like, how the hell would I have ever known to do that? And so since I lacked the patience to really solve those kinds of puzzles on my own, I was really playing the second half of this game with just my phone open to a walkthrough and just kind of going through step by step on my Vita and just playing through that. So great story, but just not what I'm looking for gameplay-wise. Up next at number 7, we have Marvel Ultimate Alliance. I was a huge fan of the X-Men Legends games on PlayStation 2. In fact, I can see from here, I can see the 2 X-Men Legends games sitting at the top of my my PlayStation 2 pile over there. And you know, I was a fan of the Marvel cartoons, so playing the action-heavy beat-em-up games like that and selecting my favorite X-Men team members and unleashing their powers was just a ton of fun. I didn't realize until they started kind of advertising Marvel Ultimate Alliance last year when it came to PlayStation 4 that those had been basically the successor to these X-Men Legend games. But I wasn't really interested in spending $40 a piece for them. I think that is overpriced for what you're getting in a 10-year-old game. But at some point this year they went on sale, and so I picked them up at a much more reasonable rate and started running through that first game. And ultimately I think I'd probably enjoyed it more now than I would have a decade ago, because I've had 18 movies, 17 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to help introduce me to a lot of the other characters that are in this game that I wouldn't have known 10 years ago. So I think it was a fun to hop back into, and the gameplay was exactly what I remembered from those X-Men Legends games. So that's why it earns the number 7 spot on my list. I didn't play too much of it, but I had a good time with what I did play. Number 6 is Virginia, which I like to describe as this beautiful silent art house kind of film. And it's not silent, but there is no dialogue spoken throughout the game. It is told entirely through pantomime and what we see and how we see the characters interact and react with one another, and the music cues of the game and the Foley cues as well, the sound effects and whatnot. And it's a very engrossing tale of Ann Tarver, who's an FBI agent, rookie FBI agent, who's been tasked with observing and reporting on her partner as they kind of investigate the disappearance of a high school student in small-town Virginia. The game often breaks with like walking simulator kind of tropes and ideas by abruptly cutting from like scene to scene to scene. Like you can be walking down a hall and then suddenly the scene changes and you're walking, up to a door, and then the scene changes and you're in your apartment or something like that. And there admittedly isn't a lot to do in the game outside of kind of going from beat to beat, but the beats themselves take a nice, wonderful turn into the surreal that I admittedly saw a lot of people comparing to Twin Peaks, but having never seen Twin Peaks myself, I know, I'm sorry. I can't make that direct comparison, but I think enough people have done it that I think it's probably an apt comparison. The main characters and the imagery that is squeezed into this game's approximately 2-hour runtime is incredibly deft and efficient, and I think it's well worth sitting down with, and then you can spend another few hours afterwards trying to search forums and figure out what did it all mean. Coming in at number 5 is a tie, kind of, Lego Harry Potter collection, years 1 through 4 and years 5 through 7. It's 2 games, but it was in one package if you got the PS4 remaster, as I did. And as someone who's been a regular fan of the Lego games since even the original Star Wars prequels game, that was the first one that came out, was the episodes 1, 2, and 3. The Harry Potter games were this weird major missing entry for me. There are only a few others, I think, that I haven't played. You have games like the second Indiana Jones game that basically added Crystal Skull to the first one. Was like, nope, don't need to play that. The Pirates of the Caribbean one because I didn't like the second and third movies enough to play them in video game form. And then The Hobbit, which I refused to play because they made it after the second movie came out, before the third one came out, and then just never followed through on their plan to do like DLC for the third film. And so fuck them, because it's an incomplete game that only takes you through the first and second Hobbit movies and nothing of the third. But that's neither here nor there. Back to Lego Harry Potter. I definitely hit a point this year where I was like, you know what, I just kind of feel like the mindless Lego grind. I want to go ahead and pick up those games, do the collect-a-thon-y thing, and then, put them down and just kind of never think about it again. And so I picked up these games and wound up within like a week and a half running through the platinum on both of them. And that's including a detour to go and get the platinum in Pyre, which came out and may or may not appear on another list later in this week. It's a definite throwback to the older style of Lego games where the animators basically tell the story without using movie dialogue, which is what you see, I think, in more of the modern games, a la Lego Marvel Avengers or Lego Force Awakens. But I appreciate the old style pantomime cutscenes that kind of take what you know and then throw little Lego jokes in there, because they always feel more creative to me. It's not just, okay, taking a pre-existing scene and then just animating it in Legos. It's how do you tell that scene without using words and still get the same point across and throw in a little bit of humor. So that's why the Lego Harry Potter collection, both games land at a collective number 5 on my list. Number 4, Transistor. Now, the Transistor theme has probably been my theme of choice on my PlayStation 4 for the better part of my time with that system. I've dabbled a little bit with some of the Final Fantasy themes and the 25th anniversary, or the 20th anniversary one, and the Persona and Undertale themes, but the Transistor one is the one that has easily spent the most time on my main screen. So I'm very familiar with the dulcet, soothing tones of Red humming her song. And the crazy part is that song is one of the later ones in the game, so I'd never actually heard it in the context of the game itself. I've tried to play Transistor a couple times over the years and just never could get too far into the game. I finally sat down, played this one all the way through, and I'm super glad I did. Red's journey with the Transistor sword is a beautiful cyberpunk tale played out with a phenomenal soundtrack in there. Gameplay is a mix of hack and slash combat as well as tactical real-time strategy stuff. It was a ton of fun. I think one of the things that probably kind of pushed me away from the game for a while was the mixing and matching of the different abilities that you collect throughout the game can be a little overwhelming at first, but eventually it just clicked for me and I was taking out enemies left and right and having a great time with it. So Transistor lands at number 4. Number 3, Final Fantasy XIV Online, A Realm Reborn. For a while now, as I have lamented the modern Final Fantasy games not really delivering what I look for in a Final Fantasy experience, I've often heard that Final Fantasy XIV Online it might be what I'm looking for. It's an MMORPG, yes, but it is one that holds so much love and reverence for Final Fantasy as a franchise and the history of it that it might be what I'm really interested in. And so with the launch of Stormblood, the latest expansion this year, and some solid selling from my friend Lauren Wilson, who is a World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV veteran, I decided to pick up the set and give it a shot, and at least through the introductory, I think, 30-day trial period that it gave me. And that's another reason that I've been wary of the game in the past. I'm not really interested in a monthly subscription model. It's one of those things that turn me off from the game. I tend to want to play too many things out there, so it doesn't make sense for me to really invest a monthly fee into something that I'm not going to have the time to come back and revisit monthly. But I hopped in, I started playing it, and I really ended up enjoying it. There's a lot of early areas in the game where I could just kind of roam the low-level enemies and hack and slash and beat the crap out of them, and there were ample story and side quests that helped me gain the experience and really level up the different character class types I was attempting and playing with. I had fun really dabbling in a little bit of everything, even some of the non-combat classes like a miner or a carpenter and stuff, and I think I wound up gravitating towards your basic tank class, first as a gladiator and then eventually as a paladin, and that's where I started deciding I needed to bounce from the game, because as you get to the game's dungeons, that's when you're matched up with kind of other, players, either your own party or other players in the game. And as the tank character, I was kind of expected to be the de facto leader, and it being my first time on some of these things, I don't know what I'm doing. I felt so bad at one point because, we got to a certain point in the thing, and then my whole team disappeared, and I'm sitting there I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The thing's not telling me what I'm supposed to do. It's not giving me, a marker of where I'm supposed to go. And then finally, somewhere in the chat, they said, hey, T Starkey or whatever, you need to go to your menu and hit this and bounce. And so I did that, and that took me to, the final boss fight. And it was just that. I don't want to be the hindrance for people who are trying to play this game and enjoy it. I didn't want to. I felt like I was holding that group back, and so I don't want to do that. And so being in that position, and also playing the game on console instead of PC, where you've got so much more key bindings and stuff and craziness, I was just I think this is the time for me to bounce. But I definitely had a lot of fun with it while I was there. One of my favorite bits of the game was that on one of my gladiator side quests, there was basically the quest basically played out almost identical to the storyline that you have between Barrett and Dyne in Final Fantasy VII, with a very knowing homage and wink to that historical game. So there, right there was the yep, this is a game that does love and give reverence to Final Fantasy of old that I love and really enjoy. And so it was a little moment like that confirmed what people were telling me about Final Fantasy XIV Online, is that it is absolutely a game that I've been looking for, if only it weren't an MMORPG where I was going to be forced to rely on other people or have other people relying on me. Drat. Number 2, Undertale. When Undertale made waves at the end of 2015, I picked it up, but I just didn't get too far. And then a few other times, same thing happened. I picked it up, I tried, and just didn't get too far. I could never get really past the opening segment of the game, regardless of how many of my friends started labeling it their game of the year and whatnot. So when it finally came to PlayStation this year, I was like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to beat this game. And by then, much of the surprise of the game, I think, had kind of worn out. I knew a lot of the big things that this game did that really wowed a lot of people, and I'd read about a lot of the different ways to approach the game. So this might be one of those cases where I think the hype had just been built up so high that nothing was ever going to match it. I wound up going for a pacifist playthrough, my first attempt at the game, and I enjoyed the handful of characters that get introduced early on and how they play into and then subvert some of the expectations that you have coming into this genre of game. I beat the game, and then I was told I hadn't done everything I needed to do, so I went back, looked at a guide, figured out, okay, these are the things I need to do to get the true pacifist ending, so I did that, and that was impressive. I really enjoyed the true pacifist ending and the story that they tell in there, but it also highlighted an issue with the pacing of the game, in that you have basically 80% of the world building happening in the last hour of a game, of one playthrough of a game. And so it was great, but I think that jumped out at me as if I hadn't played that, I never would have come across all that cool stuff. If I hadn't, if I just played through this game normally or whatever, I wouldn't have necessarily known to go back and experience all that other stuff. So I enjoyed it. Then I attempted the genocide run, and got to the first real challenging combat boss fight in the genocide run, died a handful of times, and said, you know what, fuck it, nope, I'm just going to walk away before this ends up leaving a really sad, sour taste in my mouth. I'm going to go out with, having enjoyed the game, not being blown away by it. It probably would not have been my game of the year in 15 or last year, but it was a ton of fun. The combat, the humor, the characters are all very enjoyable. The music is phenomenal, but it didn't quite set the world on fire in the way that I've been led to believe it would. Still good enough to earn the number 2 spot, though. The number 1 spot goes to 2064 Read-Only Memories. I first played this game at PlayStation Experience 2015 in San Francisco. Their booth had beanbag chairs and an intriguing retro art style that drew me in. The portion of the demo I played was a pretty basic portion that had you interacting with one of the characters, and then you had a sequence of the game where you basically control traffic lights to reroute the person that you're trying to kind of capture. You can control the traffic lights, and you have to basically direct them back to your location and trap them there. It was a fine thing, but it didn't really suck me in and say, like, oh, I have to play this game. But I stuck with it because I liked the art style, and the idea of the game intrigued me. So I followed it and kept an eye out for it, and for when it eventually came to PlayStation 4. And when it launched on PlayStation 4 this year, it launched with a newly recorded voice cast being added to the game, and it featured a handful of industry people who intrigued me, like Melissa Hutchinson of The Walking Dead, Jim Sterling, Xavier Woods, Dan Reichert. So I hopped into the game, and as I mentioned in the Broken Age segment, adventure games typically don't pull me in, but this one did. It's set in the near future, where humanity is on the brink of creating like a true artificial intelligence, and I became enamored with the characters of this story, and even more so the philosophical and political questions that it introduces. You've got things like genetic modification and the legal and moral ramifications tied to an increasingly technological society, and general human rights, which are things we're always dealing with, like, in today's age, but putting it in the near future, it's like enough removed that you can kind of speak to it and comment on it and show it through a new lens that was, I think, very interesting. And they all get their spotlight, and you have a bunch of truly special, fleshed out characters that get more time and characterization than you get in sometimes 100-hour epics. And Turing, who's your main ROM companion in this game, voiced by Melissa Hutchinson, is just a wonderful creation, incredibly brought to life by Melissa Hutchinson, and was probably one of my favorite characters of the year. So because of all of that, 2064 Read-Only Memories is my number one best non-2017 game in 2017. Let me know what games you played this year that didn't come out this year in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Trevor Starkey from TrevorTrove.com. You can follow me at SnarkyStarkey on Twitter. You can read the full rundown of this list over at TrevorTrove.com at the link in the description below. And until next time, from here at the Trove, treasure your friends.